Hello, and welcome to tonight's Bruin Family Insights virtual discussion, brought to you by UCLA Parent and Family Programs. Throughout the academic year, we engage around a variety of topics and issues intended to help you best support your student. My name is Leanne Howitt, and my husband and I are Bruin proud parents based in Tampa, Florida. Our daughter is a second-year student, and I also serve on the council of the UCLA Parents Council leadership team. Today's conversation with our special guest will focus on the role of the Dean of Students Office in the UCLA student experience. This evening, I am very excited to have with us Dr. Maria Blandizzi, UCLA's Dean of Students. Thanks for joining us, Maria. Can you please start us off by telling a little bit about yourself and your current role at UCLA?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Leanne, for the kind introduction. I'm so happy to be with you. And I think it's so cool that you're on the East Coast and I'm on the West Coast, and we're talking to parents all over the place. So it really is demonstrative of the UCLA, the care and the community that we have broadly. So I'm really excited to be all with you. So again, Maria Blandizzi, I'm a product of the University of California system. And I've gone in my undergraduate career at UC Irvine. I did my master's degree at Columbia University, and I did my doctorate in educational leadership. So I've spent all of my professional career within the University of California system, and I've been the dean for students here at UCLA for the past 4 years. So you could say that I'm a senior, not looking to graduate, but really looking to catch my stride in supporting our students. So that's me professionally. If I also just can offer, I have 2 young children. I have a 7-year-old that's a first grader and a kindergartner that is 5. So Luca and Leo and my partner Rick Juan are very invested in the UCLA community. And so I feel so blessed every day to come to campus. So, sometimes I get questions about, how's it going? And I think I'm in paradise here. This is just incredible.
Thank you, Maria. That's outstanding. What a great background you have to offer and what you bring to the UCLA campus. And I love that you're a working mom. And so there's that nice balance that you bring. So thank you for sharing all of that. And I am excited to hear more from you from tonight's conversation. We have asked many of our parents out there to provide any questions. And during tonight's live chat, if anybody is interested in having a question answered by Maria, please feel free to type it in and we will get to as many questions as we can. To get us started though, Maria, I would like to pose the following question. What motivates you to do this work and keeps you coming back every day? And conversely, what keeps you up at night?
Thank you, Leanne. So those are, those are foundational questions to get us started in this conversation. I think where I wanna begin is our UCLA students, your daughter, all the sons and daughters across the community, they are incredible human beings, really incredible human beings. And I feel so privileged and I'm grateful that our students come to campus and come to UCLA to really invest themselves in creating a community of friendship and care and compassion for one another, to challenging each other, and to learning. And when they ultimately leave here, I want to believe and I know that the time that they've spent on our campus has challenged them and has broadened their perspectives in some way, shape, or form, and that they want to go out and make the world a better place from whatever discipline their focus is. So what really motivates me is the passion and the commitment that I see our students express on a day in and day out basis, and how excellent they are in expressing their passions. And then I see my colleagues on the faculty side that are just so incredibly thoughtful and profound in the research and the academic focus that they have in their disciplines, that this is just an incredible place to be. So as an example, I too like to be a student. I've always loved learning. And so this quarter, I'm taking a class. I'm taking a class with undergraduate students and graduate students. So I also understand what's happening in the classroom dynamic because it is such a fascinating place. And typically when we open the campus for Bruin Day and for our admits and parent and family weekend, I hear family members say to me, wow, I wish I could come back and go to school. I wish that I had that opportunity that my son and daughter now has. And I feel like I get that opportunity every day. So anybody wishing to come back to college, you know, a career in university administration is never too late. We'll take you at any time. And we would love to engage with you in that way. So let me just, I think that's just foundational, that I am in an amazing community of individuals, very passionate. And then what keeps me up at night, I think we're going to get to this a little bit later, I'm sure, in the conversation, but as one example, you know, we were in the news today. UCLA is in the news for an action that's happening within fraternity sorority life. So what keeps me awake is really making sure that our students are well and healthy and safe. And when they aren't, those are instances where I'm concerned and I'm awake. And like any parent, what keeps you up at night is what keeps me up at night. So Leanne, you know, you're concerned about your daughter as you're, you know, thousands of miles away from her. Those things that keep you up are also keeping me up at night because I truly, we try to shepherd their safety and their well-being.
Maria, thank you. I truly applaud your efforts to really become so engaged with the university and with the students, and to actually take a class and just see what, you know, what that environment is for our students. I know the reason why we chose UCLA is just that feeling when you are on that campus and you just look around and you can, I saw my daughter's body language and I could just see she was just thrilled with everything that she saw. And when I joined the Parent Leadership Council, it gives me a reason to come back 3 times a year at least to enjoy the campus. But I truly understand what you're saying. It really is just wonderful to be around a collective group of people that have similar life interests at heart. So we have a ton of questions, and if I may, I'd like to get to the next one. What do you envision, Maria, to be the central role of the Dean of Students Office and the units under your purview?
So let me start by just being very specific about the units that report to me that I have a direct responsibility for, and then I'll speak more broadly. So just so folks know, and they can also target their questions, I would say that my primary responsibilities are oversight of several different student service units, which includes student legal services, parent and family programs, and making sure we're engaging with our families. The Office of Student Conduct, which is focused on having those accountability conversations when a student might have made or alleged to have made a not a good choice that is in violation of the Student Code of Conduct. Fraternity and Sorority Life, the LGBT Resource Center, our compliance with the American Disabilities Act, ADA, case management services, which is social workers, if you will, that support students in the aftermath of a medical emergency or distressing situations. Our compliance with Title IX and partnership with our compliance to Title IX. The Economic Crisis Response Team, which is a multidisciplinary team focused on supporting students in financial distress. So those are my primary areas of focus. But broadly speaking, when anyone says to me and they hear the title Dean for Students, my role is oftentimes to bring voice to the student experience or bring forward issues, challenges that our students might be experiencing to campus leadership. So, you know, if we thought about what I did on a day-to-day basis, I probably spend in an 8, 12, 14-hour day, depending on the day, 2 hours communicating with the chancellor, the executive vice chancellor, our vice chancellors about issues that students are experiencing and how we are responding and what's happening within the lives of our students, depending on the specifics. So, I mean, broadly speaking, I'm really trying to keep a pulse of what our students are experiencing on the campus. Now, that is not a generic kind of broad, you know, every student, all 40 plus thousand of them have very nuanced, incredibly complicated and detailed lives. So I'm not trying to suggest that I know all of our students, but ultimately the goal of me and my team is to really kind of get a good handle on our students' experiences and elevate those experiences to campus leadership when issues arise.
That's great, Maria. Thank you for that insight. Maria, the next question is, what makes working with the millennial generation particularly special and or challenging? And do you feel that there are misconceptions about this generation?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Thank you. So I'm going to start with the second part. Yes, I believe there are misconceptions, and I actually would want to have a little bit of a back and forth with you all about what you feel like. Ooh, excuse me. What you all feel are the misconceptions. Thank you. Excuse me. Automatic lights went off in my office. My apologies. You know, I would want to engage with you a little bit about the misperceptions, but this is what I see in the media, if you will, about what I think is not true about our students. But what I see about the millennials is that there's a perception that they're apathetic, or that they're immature, or that they are needing to be handheld, or that they're reliant on their families in a way that doesn't allow them to make decisions, or that they're highly stressed, expressing a lot of anxiety, that they don't know how to communicate over in person because they're such a social media generation. And I think all of those things are untrue. I think that they are an incredibly thoughtful generation. Again, and I wouldn't want to stereotype all students, but I do believe that where these misconceptions lie is because it's a misunderstanding of how they engage in the social issues of today. So I do not see an apathetic student body in the least bit. I find that our students are incredibly passionate and incredibly committed to a variety of issues that impact them or impact somebody that they know or in a community that they care about. I find that our students, while there might be a perception that they don't know how to make decisions or that they look to others to help them make decisions, I would say that they need a lot of information. They're very thorough in their analysis. So if I were to look at you, Leanne, and I would say, how many colleges did your daughter apply to? And what information did she need to really be thorough in her selection of her college search? It was probably a very prolonged and maybe possibly up and down painful process as your family went through that. And the reason I would say partially is because she wanted a lot of information about what she was going to commit to. And so I find often that the perception is you can't make a decision. It's not that they can't make a decision. It's that they want a lot of input to figuring out what is in their best interest and where they're going. I think they have sophisticated ways of using technology that previous generations don't understand. I see a lot of engaged social media that's very productive and opens up new ways in the way in which we engage that I might not. So that's where I have work to do to understand how best to meet and communicate with the generation. So I think the other thing that I would just say where there's potentially a perception that they're fragile or that they express a lot of stress, I do see that. I do see the stress. I do see the anxiety. And I think that comes from their own high expectations of themselves for what they want to achieve and how they want to move through the world and where they want to go. And so those high expectations at times can get the best of them. And that's when we might see a more fragile kind of way in which they're managing the emotions when things don't go the way that they had envisioned or what they've been working so hard to do. So I would never suggest that this generation is immature, unable to communicate, is coddled, or is emotionally not able to manage conflict. I would say we need to recalibrate some of those misperceptions to better understand. And that's what I do as an educator, and that's what we do to advocate for them so that other colleagues don't believe that their experience is trivialized in any way. Did I answer the question?
Very good. Thank you for checking in. You really did. And I think that you were in our house when our daughter was applying to different colleges. But it seems like you really have a great handle on understanding the generation. And I think that's awesome because of your role. You have 2 young children at home, but you know that your work role, you need to understand this group of your customers. And you've done your homework, certainly. So thank you for sharing your perspective. So I'm going to switch gears here. There's a question that came up in regards to student development, Maria, and student safety. How does your office work to educate students and address issues of alcohol and drug use and sexual assault on campus, particularly considering the common correlation between the two? I was on Facebook earlier today and I saw that the Daily Bruin had mentioned the news about the UCLA fraternities that have been indefinitely banned from hosting in-house events with alcohol. And as a mom, I was actually quite happy, Maria, to see that. And I was just curious if you could please provide some insight around this topic.
Of course, it's actually a very unique opportunity to kind of be in the middle of this situation right now and for us to talk. So let me talk specifically about what's happening today and over the weekend, and then maybe we can step back and talk about what do we do broadly in an ongoing way. So specifically, I think, Leanne, for those that maybe are watching and haven't seen the news yet, we've received a lot of attention today because the Interfraternity Council, which is one of 6 governing boards within the Greek community, has the students themselves, the council themselves, has put themselves on an indefinite suspension. This is not something that the university has done. I want to be very clear. And I'm very actually pleased and proud of them for taking this step themselves, for taking the issues seriously that they're seeing in their community to eradicate and end sexual violence against women. And they themselves are saying, as peers, how do we hold each other accountable? And as we figure this out, let's cease and desist. Let's stop on any type of social activities that we do in our houses that include alcohol so that we can reevaluate what our risk policies are and how we make sure that everybody that comes into our property and into our house is safe. So I think this is an incredibly powerful moment for the community, for themselves, and we are there with them lockstep in understanding how do we support them and how do we encourage and motivate to take these issues seriously. So I was with the chapter presidents of the Interfraternity Council in December to describe and continue to communicate my concerns with what we're seeing in the community nationally and also at UCLA. And the team in Fraternity Sorority Life, led by Kevin Dougherty and his team, are very engaged in a day in, day out with the community, making sure that folks are addressing and honestly talking about what's happening. So I see the today's step, or actually it was 2 days ago, the Interfraternity Council step is a very empowering and positive step in honestly talking about these issues. So then my second point here is I want to make sure that I'm very clear that you understand, or that parents talking about these issues is very clear, that alcohol isn't what causes sexual violence. That although these things might happen and go hand in hand, we need to, as a society, better understand consent. And we see these conversations happening nationally. It's not just happening on college campuses. It's not just happening within the Greek community. And we need to understand what it means to engage in consensual, sexual, intimate relationships with somebody else. And that alcohol does not influence whether one triggers the other. Or a violence against somebody else. There's no excuse for not understanding what consent is. So what do we do to make sure our students understand that? In the Greek community, we make them go through a mandatory 2-hour training within the first 3 weeks of the academic term. So all 4,200 students within the Greek community have gone through mandatory education on this topic. We make all incoming students do an online training related to alcohol and alcohol use. All students that go through the orientation programs also sit through a presentation that my team gives about understanding the student code of conduct and our expectations. We talk a lot about our true Bruin values and the principles of our community with our students. And then we partner with student groups. The Bruin Consent Coalition is a group of individual students that are passionate about these issues, and we partner with them to make sure that the conversation continues throughout the year. So I believe that we've got a lot of infrastructure in place to engage students in the conversation, and we need to just keep at it, because it isn't 1 year or isn't one-time conversation that we then begin to understand what's happening or what has happened in the past. And so we're going to keep at it, and we're going to be in partnership with our students as we talk about these issues.
Maria, thank you for that background, since this is so new and it just came out, you know, in the past 1 or 2 days. So thank you for sharing that background. And the fact that this information was brought forward, or the action to take the alcohol away from the houses was brought forward by the students, I think speaks volumes, quite frankly. It is not something that the administration from UCLA said, you need to do this. So again, that talks to the population of the students here, that they are mature, what you were saying earlier, this generation, and they are taking ownership for these actions and realize that if something's broke, they need to fix it. What I'd like to ask you are just 2 follow-up questions. I guess the first question in regards to the alcohol is, how will the checks and balances be in place to ensure that there is no alcohol in the fraternity houses? Who will be checking, or what type of, you know, random searches will be done?
So that's a great question. What are the accountability measures by which this will happen? So I will say that the university, we don't, there are 3 university administrators in fraternity sorority life. So while there's a checks and balances that fraternities need to do to make sure that they're hosting, that we know about the events that they're hosting in their house, we aren't physically in the space on Thursday night, on Friday night, on Saturday night. So, you know, do I anticipate 100% compliance to a statement that the Interfraternity Council has made? I can't guarantee that. But what I can offer is that I think the amount of peer pressure and public accountability measures that are in place will actually be what encourages folks to come forward to say, hey, that's not happening over there. Whatever you all talked about, there's some inconsistency. And if we hear about that inconsistency, that's when we engage in very direct conversation about what's happening. So while I'm not, and my team is not directly in the environment, we do know that we hear a lot about what's happening in the community, and we hear almost in real time, pretty quickly in real time, whether it's, you know, 3 hours later, 4 hours later. We also know that this statement has been shared with our University of California Police Department. So they are on 24 hours a day, and they go out to, you know, and police in the local community. So if we do see something of concern, our police department is the first line of response to those incidents. So, and then the police department, we work very closely. I work very closely with Chief Tony Lee and what's happening and what his officers are seeing, and communicating that to us so that we can appropriately follow up.
So what are the consequences then of the student should they be guilty and they are caught with the alcohol?
Yeah. So I think what I would want to talk you through is, what are the consequences when a student violates the student code of conduct? So this is a self-imposed action that the Interfraternity Council has had. I will meet along with the Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs on January 30th with the entire council and the Council of Presidents to ask them about how's it going, what's happening, what support do you need to help each other kind of enact a more rigorous risk management strategy in how you manage the events that are happening in your house. So I think what I would say to you is, the other thing is they've developed an action plan for what they feel like they need to be doing. And we don't have necessarily a time frame for that, but we're going to get around the table on January 30th, and we're going to talk about what accountability measures are they going to put themselves through. And then my question to them is, if you don't commit to this, then the university is going to have more additional action, and we're going to engage in more action. The specific incident that occurred that triggered some of this new action, the other thing I would add is that the organization in question, we are specifically working with that national chapter leadership, and that organization has had additional sanctions imposed upon them by the national organization. And then the university supports the national organization sanctions. So again, I'm not trying to evade the question, but the specifics, depending on the incident and depending on what's not followed, triggers a whole host of conversations and accountability measures that we put in place.
Understood. Thank you so much, Maria. So moving up, I'm just seeing that Julie has asked a question. And it's basically, what is the conversation among staff and students around sexual harassment and the Me Too movement?
Lots of conversations, depending on the spaces that one is in. I mentioned the Bruin Consent Coalition, but this is an active group of students that are engaged in doing everything they can to eradicate sexual harassment and sexual violence. They're hosting all kinds of dialogue spaces to further understand. Last night, there was a men's ally group that got together to understand how do men be allies in eradicating sexual violence. I think we're working in partnership with our Title IX office that is charged with the compliance aspect. So we are making sure that we're aggressively pursuing anytime we receive a complaint from a faculty, a staff, or a student, and going through the appropriate procedures and protocols to investigate that situation and to evaluate what's happening and what are the accountability measures we might put in place if we found a violation of our expectations and our policy. In 2016, the University of California did a very robust review across all of the University of California campuses related to these issues. We've come up with some very strict procedures and protocols by which we respond to complaints. And I think we are better for it, for the elevation of the consciousness related to understanding consent and related to what is the university's obligation in following up on complaints of this matter. So we are not in a position to suggest that we don't take anything seriously. Every concern that comes forward, we aggressively review to understand what we can rectify and what accountability conversations we need to have.
Maria, thank you so much for taking the time. These minutes are very important, as you can imagine, for the parents, so appreciate your insight. So I'm going to shift gears, and we have a question here. What do you believe are some of the key components of students' personal and intellectual development? And what does your office do to promote this?
That's a really big question. Wow. Okay, so I'm gonna just because I'm concerned about an issue recently that I'll share one component. So when I think about democracy and I think about how we engage across differing opinions, and when I look at kind of the national conversation and what I perceive to be divisiveness and really a challenge in how we talk about difficult topics that we feel deeply about, but that there might be conflict around, I think that's something that I'm really concerned about. How does that play out then in our further educating and understanding critical issues that impact our community? So in terms of the intellectual development that I'm concerned about with our students, there's a really critical, important set of skills and tools that our students need to go back to engage in critical dialogue across difference. And so what do I do, and what is my office, and what is the university and student affairs doing to engage in talking about really difficult issues? I'll give a couple examples. And you're going to actually talk about this a little bit later, about the Common Book. And we're going to offer up an opportunity to talk about the Common Book. But this is a text that we use to engage people in a conversation using a common kind of lexicon and experience. We read a book and then we talk about these experiences. So the book this year is about immigration and a family story of immigration. And we see this to be a national conversation right now. And we see some students on the in and some students on the out, and many different people having a lot of strong opinions about immigration policy in the United States. So I see, I want us to humanize the experience. I want us to understand how this personally affects each individual. My family immigrated to this country 40 years ago. I'm a first generation US citizen. And I want to be able to make sure that our students can understand that The immigration policy conversation that's happening nationally impacts UCLA right here, right now, and a student that they're sitting next to in the classroom. And so we use a common text to talk about those and to engage in discussion and dialogue. And we use a framework called the intergroup dialogue program to think about how we structure conversations to be such that they're productive as opposed to coarsening the discussion and name calling. So we're constantly trying to think about how we have very enlightening conversations that push our assumptions and help us better understand issues. And I would offer the Common Book as one. That wouldn't be my office's, but broadly speaking, something. I think the other thing that maybe we do as a foundational program we call is This is Bruin Life. This is an opportunity for all incoming students to engage in understanding the Bruin story. And they see their peers and they see alumni talking about the ups and downs of what it means to be a Bruin and how they engage in that. So that evolution of conversation and storytelling is a way that we try to open up conversation so that students don't just talk about all the great things that are happening in their life, but they also feel very comfortable in talking honestly about the things that they're challenged with.
That's great. Thank you so much, Maria. I wanted to ask you another question here. As Dean for Students, you play a central role in supporting students in crisis. Can you talk a little bit about the CRT, which stands for the Consultation and Response Team, and the ECRT, which stands for the Economic Crisis Response Team, and how they function at UCLA to help you in that work?
Thank you. Yeah, this actually is something that I spend a lot of my time on, supporting students in crisis, whether it's in a financial crisis or whether it's a mental health crisis or whether something has happened in their life that creates distress. So the way we manage this, both on the financial and the kind of mental health crisis, is we use a multidisciplinary team. So every week, I sit around the table with our police department colleagues, our colleagues in counseling and psychological services, academic affairs. When we're talking about the finances, I've also got colleagues from financial aid. I've got colleagues from the Bruin Resource Center that are focused on programmatic things specific for special populations. I'm sitting around the table with my colleagues in the residence halls and in university apartments because things pop up, right, within the housing setting. So we use this multidisciplinary team to put a lot of subject matter experts around the table so that when we're looking at a student that's in distress, we can see where that distress is playing out in the classroom, in the co-curricular environment, in their finances, in their academic performance. Are they seeking out resources to assist in this distress? Are they not? What additional resources do we need to connect? And when we have a student that's in a high level of distress, then we're assigning what we call a student case manager, who really is a person, they work for case management services, and they become that student social worker, where they sit with the student and say, let's talk about the broad issues here, and let's help you prioritize and manage all of the different triggering points that are impacting your success at UCLA. And this comprehensive approach, I think, is an effort and a focus to make sure that we're making sure, one, that we're retaining students. If they're in financial distress, we're figuring out how we retain them. So finances aren't an issue for why they need to step away. And if it's a mental health crisis, that they're getting the appropriate treatment within counseling psychological services, at the Ronald Reagan Medical Center, and that we're also trying to maintain, in an effort, the safety and security of the entire community. So we've got a three-part mission there. And I think that multidisciplinary team helps us do that. And I got to say that, the college journey can be quite stressful at different times. So we're quite busy with students kind of experiencing a whole host of crises. And it's not always in the best interest for a student to continue to engage in their academics. They might need to take some time away. And in that time, we're supporting a student taking a step away and then preparing them to come back. So when it's time to come back, that they also know exactly what their touch points are to re-engage and support their transition back. So transition them out, but also transition them back to UCLA.
Maria, thank you. There were a lot of questions that came in for tonight's webinar, but I would be remiss if I didn't read you this very positive comment. And let me just share it with you. It says, Our family had tremendous support from the Dean of Students' office a couple of years ago after our son was hospitalized for depression and anxiety. The services they offer, including a social worker to assist with transition back to classes, was extremely helpful. I think it's important for other UCLA parents to know about the services that are available regarding a variety of issues. I wanted to share that with you.
Thank you. That's wonderful. I will share that with the staff. It's not easy work to support a student in crisis, but we do it with love and care and compassion for where they are and what they're experiencing.
Very good. All right, well, I'm looking at the clock. We have...
I lost you.
Excuse me. We've got about 20 minutes to go, so here's another question. In addition to individualized student support, how is your team involved in broader disaster response on campus? What lessons have you taken away from instances like the 2016 shooting and December Skirball fire? Is there a plan for wildfires in the future? Are RAs trained when it comes to earthquakes and fires?
Yes, thank you. Those are very relevant questions. A few points. Yes, RAs are trained in fire evacuations and earthquakes. Yes, there are plans with the university has. What I do understand in the most recent activity with the fires is that folks were very concerned that we weren't communicating what those plans were. And those in emergency management and emergency preparedness will tell you we don't publish emergency evacuation plans that suggest where we'll go in an emergency for a variety of reasons, but for one of them being for the safety of the entire community. So as an example, if somebody were to call the campus right now to the police department and say, I believe there's a bomb threat happening in X area of the campus, and then if you were somebody that was wishing ill will on our community, went to a website and found, oh, the evacuation point is Drake Stadium, then we would have another safety issue on our hands. So we don't issue our evacuation plans specifically. And what we try to do is educate students to be prepared for a variety of evacuation measures. The other thing I will share is that when you train somebody on how to be prepared for emergency, if you train them to go to one specific location and that location is actually under threat, then you haven't trained them to be prepared to move to another location because we've so narrowly focused on just a step-by-step process. So our emergency management colleagues will tell us what's important is have a backpack, have supplies, be prepared to take care of yourself. The university has a whole stockpile of supplies in the case of shortages of water and food. In the case of the most recent fires, we rely on the Ronald Reagan Medical Center to provide masks and provide resources that the hospital has in times of crisis. We do a lot of training and education of the student staff that live in the residence halls. And we activate what's called the incident review team that includes the chancellor, the executive vice chancellor, and campus leadership to make decisions actively on the spot. And we have incredible relationships with the Los Angeles County Fire Department, Police Department, and city. So there's lots of information flowing back and forth about what real-time information we need to have to make the best informed decisions to how to protect the safety of the community. So a lot of social media activity actually does us harm in these times because there's lots of misinformation out there about what's happening. So I just want to direct everybody to make sure to log into the Bruin alert system, and we can provide that information for you so that you know how to get real-time information about what's happening and the status of emergencies on campus. And after the June 1st shooting, we realized that we need to communicate more. And so what you'll see now is a much increased number of alerts going out on the hour-by-hour basis about what's happening.
That's great. Thank you very much, Maria. So there's a lot of dissonance in our world right now. What role does your team play in encouraging students to effectively engage across differences?
Mm-hmm. So I think, I don't know how many of everybody on the webinar has lived, their student has lived in the residence halls, but that's our foundational kind of time period where we try to build a very productive, healthy campus community when they're living in close proximity with each other. So we do a lot of community building within the residence halls to start out the time that a student comes to UCLA in a way that they're provided opportunities to learn about each other and learn about themselves. So I see the programming and infrastructure of the RAs and the residence hall experience as foundational to how we begin the conversation in discussing and dialoguing across difference. And then there's a number of resources and programs that we have on the campus to continue that interest. So whether we're partnering with our student government to engage in town hall conversations about specific issues, or we're looking to our vice chancellor for equity, diversity, and inclusion to make a statement about what is the university's perspective on a said issue. You can look up what he calls his cross checks. This is his kind of online way in which he engages on a social issue that might be a hot button issue for the campus community. We engage in what I described as the intergroup relations program that facilitates dialogue on critical issues. We host large-scale events like This is Bruin Life at the beginning of the academic term, so that we're using storytelling and a creative way to kind of express different ways of thinking about things. So lots of different things. I host dinners called Courses of Action 3 times a quarter. So I'm engaging with students in a breaking bread together to talk about critical issues. College is really about a time of embracing difference and embracing trying to understand and learn about something that you don't know anything about. So we try all kinds of different ways to engage our students.
That's great. It sounds like you're very innovative and you're trying different areas and you're really trying to just reach the students and just better understand your population. Thank you. I have a question that's very near and dear to my heart. What do you believe is the role of parent and family programs, and why is this resource important?
Oh, you all are incredibly, incredibly important. If we could just replicate your presence here on a day in and day basis, that would be wonderful. I see your part. This is a partnership. You have worked for 18, 20, 25 years with your student. You know your student better than anybody else. And if you think you don't, because you're like, wow, they've changed so much, I would still go back to the point that you really know your student, whether they're sharing openly with you or not. So I see you all as an incredible resource. I think before they come to talk to me, they're talking to their friends and their peers. And after they talk to their peers, they're talking to you. And then what I'm hoping you do is resource them back to us and resource them back to the campus support services that are here to support them. And oftentimes what I hear is a student might hit a point where they're struggling or challenging, and then they end up at the Dean of Students office and they think, oh my God, I never knew there was that resource on campus. So parents, as much as you are watching your student kind of navigate the university community, I think Parent and Family Programs is trying to help you understand all the robust resources that are available to students. So as much as you educate yourself and you're resourcing your students, then you send them back to us. And I see it as a complete partnership in how we're supporting all of our students' development and growth during their college years. Answer the question?
You sure did. You sure did. As a follow-up, Maria, a question from Anushka is, as an international parent, how can we be more in touch with the community?
So I think our Parent and Family Programs has a very active Facebook page. I learn a lot over social media, even though I'm, on the campus. So I think, I look at there's another Facebook. I look at the UCLA Free and For Sale Facebook page to see what students are wanting to exchange with each other. That gives you a good sense of like what's cool, what's hot. I think there's a lot of venues. The Twitter feed, the UCLA Twitter feed gives you a good sense. I'm always so impressed with our athletics programs and what a powerhouse they are. So engaging in that. You can read the Daily Bruin. You can read the student newspaper. I wouldn't say that there's always accurate information that's reported in the Daily Bruin about what's happening, but I think reading the student newspaper online is another incredible way. I think there's a lot of ways that UCLA alumni offers resources and engages with the local community. So I would say there's lots of ways in, even from an international perspective. There's also new services that are provided that if your student wants to speak to a counselor in their native tongue, you should know that we've just engaged with an organization that allows virtual counseling for students in some 20 different languages. So I think we're also thinking about our international student population, and if they want to go to CAPS because they're experiencing anxiety, but they can't speak English, and they can speak English, but when you're anxious, you want to speak to somebody in your native tongue. We have new resources available to helping students do that. So not necessarily how to engage families, but how families can help their student engage in the resources on campus.
That's great, Maria. So really trying to connect with all students, no matter what their background is, no matter what their native tongue is. That's outstanding. Thank you. If I may, I have another question here. There's a lot of dissonance in our world right now. What role does your team play in encouraging students to effectively engage across differences?
So I think I'll go back to what I had offered previously, just about, the residence halls as that first preliminary touch point where we're trying to build community. Maybe something that I haven't shared previously is if a student is feeling incredibly disrespected and harassed, they end up at the Dean of Students office to understand how they can proceed through making a complaint about something that they're experiencing. So what I think is incredibly important here is not that we're just focused on building community, but we're also very focused on the accountability aspects of how we maintain community. And that's not to suggest that we're trying to impinge on free speech, but that it is to suggest that if somebody is feeling harassed, that there is a mechanism by which they can come forward to make a complaint, and we can follow up from the university standpoint. So I just offer that as kind of the two-parter, if you will. We want to build community. We want to facilitate the tools and help students gain the tools to know how to dialogue across difference. And we also want to host those events that spark controversy and spark new learning and difficult conversation on issues that we know people are talking about. And then if individuals are feeling harassed, then we have mechanisms by which we follow up in that way.
Thank you. That's good. So Maria, maybe a little bit on the personal side, but you've spent a number of years serving in roles across the UC system. What has inspired your commitment to the University of California?
I love the University of California. I think I've been on 5 different campuses, Leanne. I've been at UCLA, obviously the best one. I'll tell you how I can prove that in a minute. But I've been at the UC San Francisco campus. I've worked at UC Office of the President, and I've been at UC Irvine. I believe Clark Kerr, who is the writer of the California Master Plan that created the 3-tier university public system in California, I think is, just my hero, if you will. Incredible foresight a long time ago to create a public higher education system that I think is what makes California a powerhouse of innovation and education and consciousness and leading the world on incredibly broad issues. I think the University of California is that machine behind what makes California so awesome. So I believe strongly in public education, our mission to serve the people of California, and in serving the people of California, we're serving the globe. I think it speaks to my soul. And I'll just share that I believe so deeply in what we do at UCLA, and folks that know me, I've heard this story, and I don't mean to say it in a trite way, but I met my partner here when I worked here in my previous iteration of a job before I was dean. And our partnership is something that's prompted by UCLA and having worked here together, and then I left. And we have 2 children, as I previously mentioned, and our first child's name is Luca, and you spell Luca L-U-C-A, which is an anagram for UCLA. So I share that just to say that this is just a beautiful place. It creates, my family is forever connected to the university. And my own trajectory. I mean, having come from my own parents' immigration to the U.S. and Their work is what, you know, prompted me to be so proud and created opportunities for me and my family that I wouldn't be if had the University of California system not been what it is. So I'm incredibly indebted, and it's my life's work to be here working within the public setting of higher education in California.
Well, clearly your passion comes through loud and clear. So thank you so much. It really does speak to your heart, doesn't it?
Thank you. Thank you.
So as you look back on 2017, what would you consider your office's greatest achievements, and what would you like to look upon and improve upon in 2018?
Oh, well, I wish finances were not an issue for students that struggle. I wish that we had enough university resources to be able to solve the financial pressures that some of our students experience. So where I want to improve is to continue. I think this leads into why the chancellor is engaged and why we are celebrating the university's centennial campaign, but that we're directly invested in thinking about how do we garner the resources to continue to forge new ground and be the change agent that we are as the University of California, Los Angeles. So I guess specifically, I'm invested in making sure that our students in financial distress, that we provide them the resources to be able to maintain enrollment at UCLA. And because, you know, I don't want anybody to step away because of a financial pressure. And I'm seeing a lot of devastation happen. Natural disasters happen just 2 hours from here with mudslides in Montecito, or, you know, what's happening in Texas and Florida last summer. I'm constantly focused on where those natural disasters actually impact a student here on this campus, and how do we financially support them through that challenge if their family has, you know, been devastated by a natural disaster that, you know, it's no one can control.
All right, well, I have a few questions that actually they're on different topics. So I'm going to, again, to switch gears here. How effective do you believe UCLA is in addressing the needs of disabled students?
So I mentioned in my intro that I'm responsible for our compliance with the American Disabilities Act. This is an area in the campus that's growing tremendously quickly. So our students coming forward to seek services through the Office with Students with Disabilities is growing at a very fast rate. And we are got to keep up. And I want to just say we are very focused on thinking about how we support our students with disabilities, and we need to keep working at that and finding resources to invest in growing those services and support. But I do think that we offer a robust number of resources for students with disabilities, from the van service to getting around campus, to note-taking, to transcription, to test-taking opportunities, to advocating for faculty to extend exam time. Depending on what the diagnosis and the disability is, there's a robust set of interventions that a student with a disability can access and work with the Office with Students with Disabilities advisors to assist. That said, I think there's an incredible need to continue to invest in this area, because there's so much that is being requested.
Very good. I have a question now about academics, and we've got about 5 or 6 minutes left, so we're winding down here. Do you feel UCLA is supporting academic success when students are denied the opportunity to pursue their interests after they are already committed to the university and a financial investment has been made?
That's a good question. I think my response to that would be, and this maybe goes back to our conversation about the millennial generation. Oftentimes what I can see is our students can get focused on one thing that they want to achieve or want to make happen, that one academic major. And if there are standards, or that there are ways in which, if you're in theater, film, and television and you need to apply, or you're in music, or there are communications or poli-sci, or there are those majors that require a certain GPA to get into them, and a student doesn't achieve that, then they're disappointed, sometimes devastated. And this is where I try to talk, and many of us talk to students about, the over 100 academic majors that exist at UCLA, and how do we weave together academic coursework that meets your interests without necessarily not getting into the major that you so heavily thought you were getting into. So the counseling that comes at that point when a student is very disappointed about not getting into X major, I'm oftentimes, and my colleagues are oftentimes attempting to say, okay, how do we think differently about what you were trying to accomplish with that major, and how might we map out a course of academic plan that allows you to still have a focus in a variety of areas that touch on those things. The other thing that I think is, oftentimes we might have wanted one thing, and this bump in the road suggests that I need to open myself to other possibilities. And we might not be focused on those, but this is an opportunity to try to recalibrate and rethink about why I was so interested in X major, and how can I continue to pursue my passions without being so narrowly focused on one way to do that.
Thank you, Maria. Just one last question, and then I have some closing remarks. So if you could maybe take a minute to respond. How can the counseling, especially around majors and classes, improve? My daughter has received very mixed and often conflicting advice, and only happened upon her major after learning about randomly at a party. Thank you.
Let me be quick. So we have 2 programs at the beginning of the fall quarter where we call it Major Blast, where literally all the academic departments get into a room, and you can literally walk around to each academic department and learn about different majors. So I would encourage everybody to look for the Major Blast program announcements, so you can learn about different academic disciplines. And then in terms of the inconsistency in advising, I would start with wherever the students call academic major is. So either College of Letters and Sciences and going to that academic advising team, or engineering and going to that advising team. So I would need a little bit more specifics to advise the student that we're talking about right here, but I do think it's important to kind of start with the foundational advising teams in one's academic discipline, and then to branch out from there.
Maria, thank you so much for all of your contributions this evening. You have answered these questions just in full detail, and I know I have personally learned quite a bit more about the internal workings here at UCLA. We've learned everything from just the culture and the different generation, and also just safety, and just the recent news this week regarding the fraternity houses, and just academia and health and safety. So thank you for that. For our parents out there, the recorded version of this webinar will soon be available. And if you posed a question and it was not answered, Parent and Family Services will be sure to follow up with you via email. And I'd like to put a plug in there for our Saturday, February 3rd, social coffee socials. These will take place around the world. In fact, I'll be hosting one here in Tampa. So if you haven't already RSVP'd, please do so for the Parent and Family Coffee Social near you. You can visit parents.ucla.edu for more information. And finally, please don't forget to join us for our next virtual discussion, The Best We Could Do, a common book discussion, which will take place on Thursday, February 15th at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thank you so much, Maria. Maria's holding up the book. She has read it. She has testified that it is an outstanding book, and it is a graphic novel, correct? So that is something. It's got a lot of pictures, and it'll pose some interesting dialogue afterwards. And so we will have a great conversation around that on February 15th. Again, The Best We Could Do, the 2018 book selection by T. Bruin. And it's about her family journal from Vietnam. We look forward to seeing you then. We want to thank you. Have a wonderful evening. Good night. Thank you.